Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Future Dimensions 360. As you guys know, in our last tutorial, we had got an example of code duplication that we are going to use in our current tutorial for higher order components. Let me go ahead and try to tell you what are higher order components first. Higher order components is a component or a function that take component as an argument or as a parameter and return a new component. How? Like you can say new component will be returned from a higher order component when you pass an original component to the HOC. There's another way where you can say like higher order component takes an argument of original component and return an enhanced component with some extra functionalities. For example, I'll say in case like there is an Iron Man, how we will get an Iron Man? When you will pass Tony Stark in this suit, in Iron Man suit. Like Iron Man suit or with suit is a higher order component. As soon as Tony Stark goes inside the suit, it turns into an extraordinary superhero named as Iron Man with an enhanced component or enhanced functionality. So I think you guys understand it's actually what are HOCs. HOCs are the components or the functions that take component as an input and return a component as an output as well. So let's go ahead in our code and try to implement one normal higher order component. What we have done in our last tutorial is like we had created an increment counters with click counter and hover counter. Like here we are hovering and incrementing it and we are clicking and incrementing it. Now what I want is I want to create a higher order component in which I can define this increment counter functionality and I want to share that functionality within hover counter and click counter both. So what I have to do here is I have to create a new file and I will say for example with counter.js. This is my file for high HOCs. I have to import React in this one, import React. So I had imported React. Now what I have to do is I will create const and updated component. For example, I can say updated component. Okay, it's equal to what it will take as an input, original component as an input. Original component as an input will go, okay, arrow function. Inside it, what I have to do is I have to create a class. Which class is that? That is new component. My class will be new component, and that will extend to react.extends to react.component class, and inside it a required method named as render, and the render method should return a original component. That's what I want right now, and what I have to do here is I have to return this class component as well. I'll say return new component as well, and down to it I want export default, this class also export default, and inside default I want to updated component, I want to export it. Now this is a very normal and very common HOC. What it is doing is I am creating an arrow function. This is an arrow function. If I'll wrap it into the bracket, you guys can see this is my arrow function. Okay, just neglect this one for the meantime. This is an arrow function, and inside arrow function what I am doing here is I am inside an arrow function, I'm creating a class that extends to React component and returning a original component. Okay, and that class I'm returning back from this arrow function, and then I am exporting this function here. What I want to original component. For example, right now I am not adding any functionality to my original component. For you guys, I'll just add a name for your understanding, and that is future dimensions 360. I'll add that name here. Let me hit save and try to import this class in my hover counter. Import this function, sorry, with counter. Import, sorry, the class name is updated component, and I'll just do one thing when I'm exporting this one hover counter. I'll just do one thing. I'll wrap it with my updated component or HOC, and that's it. And what I'll do here is before hover, I will try to export props here. By the way, I will just export here const and curly braces. I'll say name equals to this dot props, and I'll just show the name here. That's it. And let me try to do same with my click counter as well. I copy pasted it. I'll copy this one here, copy, and then wrap my click component before export here. And what I will do here is I will try to copy this one state as well here. That's it. And then name should be passed in the beginning. And yeah, that's it. Let me go here. You guys can see my both component takes what it's taking. Future dimensions 360, click 0 time. Future dimensions 360 is coming from where? From my higher order component. This is the normal functionality that I can pass to the child component from higher order component, or my child component can share this functionality. Now what actually I'm looking for is not a name. I'm looking for is a click functionalities. So what I have to do here is I have to copy my constructor. I'll copy it from here and I have to paste it here inside my class. Which class that I had created inside the function, inside my HOC function, higher order component function. And these two things like the state value counter and the increment counter, both I will pass it as props. How I can pass it as props? Let me show you how I can pass it as props. I'll say counter, counter counter equals to, let me destructure the props here. For example, I'll say const counter, and that is equals to this dot state, and I'll pass this counter here as a prop. And then the second one is increment counter, that I will pass as a props as well. So I'm passing the counter and increment counter as a props also. This increment counter should be accessed with this dot increment counter name. Hit save, and I'm passing these two parameters, the counter and increment counter, as a props to my original component. So in original component, what I have to do is I have to accept these two things. What I have to, by using props, I will destructure my props by using curly braces. I'll get rid of this state, and this counter will be the same one, and increment props, I'll just remove this name in this from in beginning, and this name I'll get rid of this name as well. Same thing what I have to do here is I have to do in my click counter as well. I have to get rid of this keyword here, and I have to remove name from the click as well. Let me go ahead and show you, like click 0 times and hover 0 times is here. Let me move my mouse. You guys can see my click hover counter is working. Let me click here, see my click counter is working as well. What I am doing here is I am making a higher order component in which I am putting the functionalities for with counter, and that with counter I am sharing in my child component. So what it is saying here is, like, this is with counter. For each component what it's taking as an input, it's passing a separate state and separate increment counter for every component what you are exporting. Like here you are exporting this component as a child, and then you are just creating the counter inside this child. Like For each child, your states and your counters are different in the memory. It will not affect one will not affect the others, as you guys can see here. Similarly, let me go ahead and try to work with the naming convention a bit also. Like you guys can see with counter, I had name. So I'll just write the name as well with counter. And in down, I will export it with counter as well. Here also with counter I will do. And here also I'll say with counter. And this one as well, I'll just say with counter because the naming convention is like this with counter. It should be with counter. The file name and your function name should be same. New component should be, for example, I'll say it's for me, for example, original component is a wrapped component, and I'll be using the same here as well. Original component is a wrapped component, and for example, new component is a counter component, or I'll say with counter with capital letter. So this is what is the naming convention should be actually as per React. So just keep it in mind, the React have this kind of naming conventions. So as you guys can see, my all functionalities are working very fine, very okay. Let me go ahead and summarize what we have learned in this tutorial, how it's working. We had learned HOC. What are HOCs? HOCs are the function that take component as an input and return a component with enhanced functionalities. So what we have done here is we have an app.js in which we have a component class, component app, in which we are importing two different counters. One is click counter and the other one is hover counter. If I'll move towards click counter, let me get rid of this state here and all that stuff here also, because it's just useless here because I'm not using it. Let me go ahead and show you that click counter works very normally. So what I am doing here is click counter. In the click counter, what I am doing is I'm rendering directly. What I'm rendering, I'm taking from props. What I'm taking from props, counter and increment counter. Two functionalities, the counter and the increment counters I'm taking from the props. And that props are coming from where? From the with counter component. What is that with counter component? It's a higher order component that takes a component as an input and return a new component as an output. What is that component? This is a class component that it will return. This is the class component, a new enhanced component. And the new enhanced component is what? That will be the normal component, and what it will pass two props as in two parameters as a props. What are those parameters? One of them is counter and the other one is increment count function. Similarly, same happened with my hover counter as well, and I am just passing both in the return functionalities to achieve my counter functionalities. I hope you guys understand it. Please don't forget to like and subscribe our channel. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.